as long as man has existed, we have always seemed to be fascinated, maybe even a little bit obsessed with understanding human nature, human behavior, and the human mind. Psychology is the scientific study of the human mind and its influence on human behavior. How do we develop our personalities? Where do we find motivation for our behavior? What makes life meaningful, or what is happiness? We all seem to have our own idea of what the answers to these questions are, and may feel like we're walking psychologists, psychologizing every situation. This is Politically Correct, and I am Maya Hayakawa. You're going to want to get comfortable because this is going to be an interesting show. I'm actually very excited about today's show because for those of you who may not know, my actual background training is actually in clinical psychology. I feel very much at home with today's topic and I can't wait to start this discussion. Here with me today, I have a special guest, clinical psychologist Dr. Joe Omollo, who is also the CEO of Crossway Psychometrics and Personality Testing Center. He is here with me to challenge, demystify, and clear up all these common myths regarding psychology, psychometric, and also psychological assessments. Welcome to the show, Dr. Omollo. Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you, Maya.
Thank you for
joining
us tonight on Politically Correct. As you can see, I am quite excited about today's show.
Me too.
How are you doing?
I'm doing great.
And I'm actually asking, not on the level of psychology, but just yeah, because it's very different depending on
I'm great all around.
All right. Well, first thing is first. I'm sure a lot of people who are watching this right now are just like, okay, Maya, what is this that you're going on about? What is this psychometric testing, this personality testing, this psychological assessment? For those of the viewers that do not understand, can you just briefly tell us what psychometric testing and psychological assessment is all about?
Well, let me just begin by saying that psychological assessment is actually the science within social sciences, in particular psychology, that actually applies scientific methodology in the evaluation of behavior. You could say in layman terms that it is the equivalent of going to the hospital and taking a blood sample or a urine sample to take it to the lab so that they can find out what could be wrong or what's happening with you. And that's not always negative, of course. It can also be assessing generally what is functional or what is good about you. So in short, when you talk about psychological assessment, that's really what we're doing. Only this time we're doing it with regard to psychological functioning, what we call the mind. We're looking at behavior or personality. We're looking at the way the brain functions. Again, in layman terms, we'd call it cognitive functioning. We're looking at one's emotional life and how they're functioning, emotional, even social life. I mean, just about every aspect of human behavior can be evaluated. Now, the science that deals with that, by applying those mathematical or scientific methodology in doing that, that science is what we call psychometrics or psychological assessment.
And what kind of psychometric testings or assessments are there?
Well, like I said, this is wide. Every aspect of human behavior can and is testable, so to say. Now, just to make it simple, this is classified into broader areas that makes it kind of easy. When we are looking at how people think, then that kind of assessment falls in the class of cognitive assessment. When we are looking at how the sum total of how people think, feel, and act socially or otherwise, which we term as personality, that is personality assessment. When we are looking at people's aptitude, interests with regard to career and jobs, or the orientation thereof. Then we are looking at career and career testing and interest type of evaluation. When we are looking at brain disorders and things like that, that is more from an organic level, then we are looking at the neuropsychological assessment. Now, sometimes we are also interested in what is going on deep within people, because we know human beings are complex creatures. And sometimes, okay, we psychologists concede that our inner world is like 90%, you know, that what we see outwardly is just like what they call the tip of the iceberg. That inner self, we have devised clever tools, creative if you may, for assessing that. That is the world of what we call projective assessment. Here we cleverly try to get or tap into the unconscious motive or drives that make people who they are. As psychologists, we believe that an individual is a lot more than what we see, and in fact what makes them who they are has to do with this deep inner self.
And while people that are watching this right now and are saying, okay, well, that's great, okay, I can get an assessment in terms of how my cognitive skills are or whatever it may be, but how can I really apply this to real life daily situations? How can I apply this and how is this really applicable to me? Why have some general knowledge on that?
Well, first of all, I think we should look at this from about 3 perspectives. Okay, to answer the question, why? I think we need to also understand the what part of it before we can justify the why. What is life all about? What is the individual life all about? Are we just a set of floating organisms that are nonsensical and in the random occurrences of nature just happen to be around? Or are we some kind of purposeful beings? And so in terms of the what, I think as human beings we are actually more interested in just not just being in existence, but also feel comfortable with the fact that we are largely in charge of shaping our destinies, making choices that have to do with ourselves and what makes us tick, what makes us happy, what makes us functional. So, in order to do that, of course, we can do that in a random way, but it's a whole lot better if we do that from an informed perspective.
I like that because it's like I was saying in the introduction, we as human beings have always been so curious to know what is it that constitutes a human being, why do we do certain things, why do people think in a certain way or behave in a certain way, and most of it was just theory, most of it is just you know, in philosophy, and we know that psychology stemmed from philosophy, and this is not really about you speculating and having theories, but it's actually tested material. Is this correct?
Yeah, absolutely. Because psychological testing is actually one of those ways that actually makes those theories more
valid.
Exactly, more reliable. They tend to offer some kind of evidence that some of what was said in those theories is actually accurate, and some of it needs to be modified by the same token. So when we do the evaluation, like you ask the question, why do it, or even the what part of it, this is where we are able to know for sure that this is what it is, whatever it is that we call it. If whether it is a normal behavior, whether it is slightly abnormal behavior, what sometimes we might call it mid-range or neurotic behavior in a more technical sense, or whether it is completely out of touch with reality, we may ask even that, you know, when you say somebody is out of touch with reality, what reality? And how do we measure that reality? What is real? What is normal? I mean, who wants to be normal?
That is actually the question that I was going to ask you next. When you started bringing up this topic of normal versus abnormal behavior, then what is really normal behavior? What's really abnormal behavior?
Exactly. See, when you enter into that kind of questioning and discussion, now you begin to see why some form of testing methodology is important. Because otherwise, then we are just telling stories. Everybody just offering their opinion. We really don't know. But as a science, we believe that we can do a lot more, and we do. We have to have some tools with which we can actually measure and ascertain that what we are saying is what it is, so that when we qualify something as normal, we can offer a basis for that normality. We can offer a basic operational definition of what that looks like, so that we know when there is deviant behaviors from the norm. Now, all those, of course, are in a very relative sense, although that is not to say that certain behaviors of normality would not be absolute. Like you talk about in a biological sense, all of us need some air to breathe. That's almost an absolute. I believe it's an absolute. We need to drink water to survive. We need to rest. We need to eat. All that kind of stuff. That's within that. That's normal. If that wasn't functioning in a medical sense or psychological, then that would be termed abnormal. From a psychological perspective, it's a bit more challenging to do that, but that's what we're really saying, that we can actually establish a behavior and contextualize it as normal versus abnormal.
All right, so you've answered why the part of why the psychological testing, the psychological assessment, psychometrics, but what is it that we're testing?
Yeah, if you say, you know, what we're setting, I already say that in the definition.
Yes.
We are looking, we are assessing one's behavior. Remember, psychology by definition is a science of behavior. Okay, we deal with behavior now.
I mean, when people say behavior, they're like, okay, Dr. Joe, what kind of behavior? Give me some examples. Give me some tangible examples.
Okay, when you say how a person behaves, how a person is likely to behave, and how a person behaved before, okay, that is something that we can test. Now, based on the data that we can collect, we can be able to say, or even predict to some degree, how a person is likely to behave in a given situation. As a matter of fact, much of what we call personality assessment has to do with knowing the person's current traits and temperaments, in order that we may be able to predict to some degree how they are likely to respond to various experiences, we call them stimuli, or what outcomes we should expect. You know, when we say this is so-and-so's character, a lot of times we're really looking at the person's normal or typical behavior. When you say, and we use these terms, so-and-so acted out of character.
What does that really mean?
Exactly. What does that really mean? Chances are, from a lay perspective, we are looking at that as we know them to behave a certain way ordinarily, consistently. But on this occasion, they have deviated from what they would normally be expected to do, or what we know them to do. Now, even before an individual was able to do that, when we do the assessment, we are able to accurately predict that outcome even before the behavior happened.
Absolutely interesting, and I know that it's applied in a lot of areas, but where can we apply some of these psychometric testing and assessments?
Everybody is interested in some relationship, for example.
Okay.
Boyfriends want to know about their girlfriend. Girlfriend wants to know about boyfriend. Should I marry this one? Should I not? Who's the cool guy? What is cool among teenagers? What does that really mean?
What is the likelihood our marriage will survive?
Exactly. So, you know, already people ask this question. Now, typically people go with this just randomly, fall in love, think I like what I'm seeing.
Trial and error.
Trial and error, you know. And we're saying, no, you know, we can help you with that. In fact, recently they found out that, you know, these marriages, you know, what they call it, dating sites and all that.
Online
they've been around
sites.
some of countries for, I don't know, give and take maybe a decade plus, that actually they are already showing a greater rate of success by far, yes, compared to the normal, let's meet, you know, love up and do a thing, you know, shut up, do whatever, you know, marriages. And I think one of the reasons is because these guys actually apply some of these things. What they do, they take data of your personality, you know, this person, what they like, what they don't like, what your typical behavior is, and then they match you up with partners that are likely to be the best fit for you.
You know what? Now that you've actually brought that up, Dr. Joe, you have reminded me of an article that I came across. It was a very fascinating article that talked about online dating.
Right.
I'm sure you've heard of this application called Tinder. Have you? All right. Now, it was interesting because what they were saying was like back in the day, I don't know, maybe your parents' generation, they'd had to do, the typical old school way of having to sit down, get to know someone. Right. It's time consuming, going for those dates and getting to know someone, so on and so forth. Or maybe you're set up in an arranged marriage. Yeah. But through Tinder, you literally can meet 50 or 100 people in a span of 5 minutes and just decide yes, nope, nope, nope. How can you practically do that in real life? It's not possible. I found that article interesting. What are your thoughts on that?
Exactly. In fact, it's the example I'm drawing from. By saying this, I must issue a disclaimer. I'm not by any way advocating for any of that. I mean, some people still are uncomfortable, me included to some extent. I have my own doubts about that. But I'm just saying, again, this is scientific data. I mean, this is record they're saying. My take on it, like I said, is that perhaps one of the reasons, and of course we're talking about those that are better designed, that they actually use some kind of personality assessment data, and you ask where it applies. Now, we are able to do that. If you went for, these days it's popular to go, say, for premarital counseling. Again, done correctly, what we should be concerning ourselves is that, getting to know somebody, and there is tools that can help you know the person you're relating to much faster and more meaningfully than if you just, you went out there on a date. An ordinary date, the truth is most times people in a dating situation just want to put forth their best face. We wear the darkest masks to mask our real selves until we obtain the object of the target of our affection here, and then things begin to happen. When the
sometimes we don't even know what we want.
Exactly. But here what we're saying is that in terms of relational counseling, psychologists are able to help you know yourself, what you want, what you are like, and then also be able to help you what sort of person would be best for you. And sometimes that's not exactly what you thought.
Maybe something different.
Maybe something completely different, but just based on that data, it is possible to see that based on your personality or your type, your typical behavior, likes and dislikes, you are more likely to get along better with this type of person, or this person would be a better fit for you. Now, that is at least on the beginning end. Once people are already in the relationship, again here in the relationship, there's just tons of tools available to help you. And some of these are actually fun and exciting. You can actually have tests that help you to understand your individual temperaments, where you've had people talk later on, have some time to talk more a bit about that. Somebody is an extrovert versus somebody else is an introvert. And what does that really mean? Does it mean if I'm an extrovert, I need to marry another extrovert, or is it better if I have an introvert? All those kind of things. You hear people talk about somebody is more of a choleric. What does that mean? Versus somebody is more phlegmatic. What does that mean? I mean, we're talking about two people who are completely opposites and are driven by completely different demands and things like that.
And they're different ideologies, actually. Some people may say that opposites attract, and that you're more likely to be able to have a successful relationship if you're opposites. Others would say that you need people that have similar traits and similar values. But what does research actually say about that?
Exactly. I mean, I think sometimes some of these things that have been observed to be said, sometimes they actually have some truth to them. You could say so. Other times, not entirely so. But when you say like opposite, in nature, of course, we hope that people who get married are essentially opposite biologically. We hope so.
Oh, let's not go there.
But we're not going to go there, not today. Not today. But from a psychological perspective, are we to assume that in nature that doesn't apply? That perhaps your best fit in a complementary sense could be somebody that is different from you, in which case then they become more of your complementary other to make you complete. I've heard of good husbands and wives refer to their spouses as my better half or my other half. And I think that there's some truth to that in terms of looking at that. But that getting that is what is
The
usually
issue.
problematic. So that's one, relationship, and there's tons of areas, knowing whether you're satisfied in that relationship, what kind of person, what problems are we dealing with, from personality, from the way we think. All these are areas where you can be helped. In areas where we are looking at people or individuals who may be having problems, maybe some kind of emotional problem. Families sometimes have no idea that what they're dealing with is actually some serious pathological problem. Again, that is an area where we can get a lot of help readily.
Being able to diagnose someone with a particular mental disorder,
emotional disorder, exactly, psychological disorder,
cognitive disorder.
Exactly. And if you know that, then at least you can do something about it earlier, and maybe come together with a package that can help them, or find the right professional to help them, or even decide whether or not they need a professional help, because sometimes families also overdiagnose where they shouldn't be. They start to think this is maybe a mental problem when maybe it is not. So again, all these issues can be clarified. Big issue in education today. Education is a forest. Most of us will remember times when we've been totally lost, not even knowing what is going on with us, what we want. Somebody sat down, came up with this curriculum. Now I have to go to school, take this subject and that one and that one and that one. And it's very, very confusing. Again, some of these tools are there to help us to know what are our natural strengths, what are our natural weaknesses, how does this individual think, what subjects can they be best in, what subjects are they likely to struggle in, and what can be done about that. Or even in the whole picture of learning, do they have a learning problem, or do they have at least an average ability at learning, or do they have an above average, or even are they gifted? Could we be dealing with a genius? How do we find out all this? So if you look at it, even just there in education, there is just tons of areas where psychological assessment can be applicable and should be applicable, even here in Kenya.
All right, you've given a brief overview of relationships and education, and how psychometric testing can be applied in those two areas. We need to take a quick break, but when we come back, let's take a look at some of the other areas that we can apply this assessment tools. And so make sure that you keep it tuned here on Politically Correct. We'll be right back.